Army, Navy, and Air Force, all been expanded, and a lot of capacity building has taken place. This has yielded impressive results since the end of the war. The latest example, which took place at the beginning of this month, was the arrest of an LTT intelligence cadre named Sri Skandaraja. This cadre had fled the country during the last stages of the conflict, but had to return to Sri Lanka illegally recently and was active in Trincomalee. This arrest and others like it have been made possible only because of the maintenance of the constant vigilance by the intelligence services. This vigilance is in turn supported by the presence of military camps at strategic locations in the north and east. Although the military has been recognized from a war, reorganized from a war footing to a peacetime role, the number of troops deployed in the north and east reduced, and its involvement in maintenance of law enforcement activities stopped. Its continued presence in these areas remains essential. This is first and foremost part of the normalization process that was necessary after the end of the terrorist conflict. The government has always maintained military camps in strategic areas which are of critical importance to the preservation of national security. In this context, it is extremely unfortunate to note that certain ethnocentric political parties continue to demand the removal of military camps from the north and east. These parties are mostly funded by pro-separatist elements, so it is no surprise that their aims remain similar to those of the LTT, even though they show a democratic face to the world. What is much more disturbing is that certain influential political figures in the democratic mainstream have supported this demand to remove military camps from the north and east. This is an extremely dangerous and irresponsible action that could seriously undermine our national security and threaten our future prospects. Removing the military due to pressure from parties with hidden agendas could very well undo the immense progress that has been achieved in Sri Lanka over the past 9 years. Despite the immense pressure being brought to bear by these political forces, some NGOs, and even certain foreign powers with vested interest, the incumbent government will take all measures necessary to preserve national security. The fact that peace and stability remain firmly in place 5 years after the end of the conflict is to a large degree because of such measures taken by the Ministry of Defense and its agencies. The fact that no incidents of large-scale violence have broken out after the war does not mean that such threats do not exist. It merely means that these threats have so far been very effectively dealt with. For example, there have been several attempts by the LTT remnants over the past 2 years to reorganize and carry out terrorist activity in the country. In March 2012, a member of the EPDP was killed in Trincomalee by a group of LTT cadres. These cadres had returned to Sri Lanka illegally via boats from Tamil Nadu, where they had fled during the last stages of the humanitarian operation. In December 2012, intelligence and law enforcement agencies were able to arrest 2 youths who were returning to Sri Lanka from Chennai after undergoing training on how to make IEDs, improvised explosive devices. These youths revealed that there were many more LTT cadres in Chennai who were working towards the reorganization of the LTT and the resumption of violence in Sri Lanka. As a result of the information received, a combined operation was carried out with the Chennai police to arrest these cadres and dismantle this terrorist cell. Despite the success of that operation, it is evident that the LTT's operatives will continue to work towards resurrecting terrorism in Sri Lanka wherever and whenever they can. The most recent and visible instance of LTT activity resuming took place earlier this year. Intelligence agencies were able to uncover a covert LTT group run with support of the LTT's international network. More than, 40 suspects, including several cadres who had evaded capture during the conflict, were detained for investigations. Ammunitions for T-56 assault rifles, mortar shells, grenades, and 2.5 kg Claymore mine were also recovered. These weapons would most likely have been part of a cache hidden by the LTT during the conflict and recovered only recently. Most significantly, the arrest led to a lead on the whereabouts of a person called K.P. Selvanayagam, alias Gopi. Must have read in papers. Gopi was a senior LTT cadre who had fled the country during the war, but had returned illegally earlier this year to restart LTT activities in Sri Lanka. He was killed in a shootout during a search operation in the Vanni region, in the jungles of Vanni, the 11th of April, along with 2 other senior cadres. One of these cadres was a member of the LTT Air Wing and was involved in the attacks on Anuradhapura Air Base and the Kolonnawa Petroleum Storage Base in 2007. What these incidents demonstrate beyond any doubt is that the threat of terrorist activities resuming in Sri Lanka remains a very real national security concern. It is therefore essential that all the measures taken by the government to counter these threats continue uninterrupted. Similarly, the possibility of interference in Sri Lanka's internal affairs by external forces remain a very real threat to our sovereignty. Although the government has successfully foiled all attempts to resume violence in Sri Lanka, the activities of the LTT network in the international arena still continues, as you know. Through heavy lobbying in foreign capitals, influencing high-profile figures in the international community and the media, and by carrying out concerted and skillful propaganda campaign, these groups have succeeded in internationalizing Sri Lanka's internal affairs over time. This is a process that took place over several decades, Many in the international community assumed that the LTT was just a ragtag group of fighters emerging from time to time from amidst the civilian population to carry out attacks. They did not fully understand that the LTT was a vast, sophisticated military force that at times outgunned, outmaneuvered, and overran the Sri Lankan military. Because of this misreading of the nature of the LTT threat, either through innocence or willful ignorance, and also as a result of certain geopolitical agendas, some influential foreign governments did not quite support the government's decision in 2006 to pursue a military solution to the terrorist conflict. Although several friendly countries had banned the LTT, not all of its activities in the international arena were stopped. For example, the LTT continued raising funds through various means and very successfully procured its weapons from overseas. Members of LTT-linked groups also built significant pressure on the government of Sri Lanka to stop the humanitarian operation. They intensively lobbied foreign governments, organized large public protest, and used their influence with international media to make various allegations against the Sri Lankan military. His Excellency the President, Mahinda Rajapaksa, did not cave into this pressure, and the humanitarian operation continued until terrorism was defeated in Sri Lanka. However, in the years after this defeat, the same LTT-linked elements have redoubled their efforts in the global arena. Their new strategy is to claim to be human rights activists who are working to bring the Sri Lankan government and its military to justice for alleged crimes and human rights violations during the humanitarian operation. It is largely because of these efforts that despite the end of the conflict 5 years ago, the United Nations Human Rights Council continues to keep Sri Lanka high on its agenda. An investigation whose justification and legitimacy has been categorically rejected by the government is now being carried out through the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. This is in spite of all the efforts made by the government through official publications to demonstrate that the humanitarian operation was conducted in accordance with the international norms. This is despite conclusive evidence put forward to show that the mass killings did not take place. For example, a comprehensive professional census was carried out by the Department of Census and Statistics using Tamil-speaking enumerators from the north and east in 2011. This census has conclusively proven that the number of lives lost during the humanitarian operation, including those of LTT cadres, is a fraction of numbers that are being alleged abroad. The majority of the deaths, in fact, were of LTT cadres who died during the fighting. Despite all of these evidence to the contrary, the notion that the military acted against civilian interest is being given a lot of support at multilateral forums because of the work of certain LTT influential individuals and organizations. There is also credible evidence that a concerted campaign has been undertaken by the LTT and its sympathizers to fabricate evidence against Sri Lanka for use in the international investigations. If you can remember, the blank complaint forms signed by resettled civilians have been found in the possession of an ex-LTT cadre working in concert with a prominent ethnocentric political party. It is overwhelmingly likely that these forms were to be submitted to the international investigation after being filled out by third parties. Many more such blank sign forms no doubt exist. One can only assume what accusations will be found on these pre-signed blank forms once they are filled in and submitted to the international investigation. Yet, unfortunately, this is what is being claimed as credible evidence by these agencies. It is particularly disturbing to note that a spokesperson of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has even indicated that evidence submitted after the deadline would not necessarily be rejected. This shows the extent to which basic principles of due processes and fair play have been ignored in the rush to have an international investigation into Sri Lanka. Notwithstanding these issues and the falsity of the allegations being made, and despite the sad irony of LTT cadres and operatives being allowed to make accusation against the military, the Geneva process could have serious repercussions. Sri Lanka's sovereignty could be gravely affected unless the government remains strong and stable. It is only if the government remains strong that it will be able to take the decisions necessary to secure the best interest of this country. Sri Lanka must strongly and consistently maintain its principled rejection of the international investigation. We must also continue to actively muster the support of friendly nations in the international community. In this regard, it is important to bear in mind that the pressure mounted against Sri Lanka comes only from certain parts of the world. It is by no means reflective of a world opinion. As long as the government remains strong and stable, action detrimental to Sri Lanka cannot be easily carried out through international processes. Above all, the government must remain able to reject demands from various quarters that are inimical to the national interest. This is a serious issue that all Sri Lankans must take note of and be vigilant about. Peace exists in Sri Lanka today as a result of the humanitarian operation. Peace exists because His Excellency the President had the political will, the determination, and the courage to see the military campaign through to the very end. Peace exists because the armed forces carried out an extremely difficult operation through immense hardship for 3.5 years to defeat the terrorists. During this time, more than 6,000 brave soldiers gave up their lives, and 25,000 more suffered serious injury to win over our freedom from the LTTE's terror. Our peace, stability, and security, our very future, in fact, was won at immense cost. We must never forget that. And we must never allow these sacrifices to be demeaned or diminished because of international pressure or because of political convenience. In this context, it is extremely unfortunate to note that there are some influential figures within Sri Lanka who have said openly that the country should submit itself to an international investigation. One such figure has even admitted to being proud of her children for saying they were ashamed to be Sinhalese and Sri Lankans after having watched what is little more than an LTTE propaganda film aired on Channel 4. The question we must all ask ourselves at this point in time is whether we are willing to risk the future of Sri Lanka by weakening our resolve to protect what we have legitimately achieved. Can we trust those whose past actions were dictated by external pressures to do what is best for Sri Lanka in the future? The most critical thing for Sri Lanka today is the maintenance of stability. Ensuring that our present momentum does not falter requires continuity above everything else. All of the problems caused by 3 decades of terrorism and lacks of governance of past governments cannot be solved in just 4 years. The sheer range of issues is far too great to have been dealt with comprehensively in such a short span of time. In fact, in consideration of how vast these challenges were, the progress that has been achieved by the incumbent government since the end of the war is truly remarkable. Between 2006 and 2009, the government's focus was on ending terrorism and bringing peace to Sri Lanka. From 2009 to date, its focus has been on maintaining that peace, stability, and security, whilst creating an environment conducive to sustained economic growth. As we go forward, I'm absolutely certain that all the remaining issues we face as a nation, including issues of national reconciliation, good governance, will be systematically addressed and solved by the government. This will contribute to the creation of a resurgent Sri Lanka that can stand proudly and independently as a peaceful, stable, fast-growing, sovereign state in the community of nations. If this is to be the case, we must not stray from the transformative path we have been on for the last several years. Instead, we must continue on the journey we have been on together. It is both our duty and our privilege to sustain our present momentum as a nation and achieve all that we can for Sri Lanka and for Sri Lankans. Thank you. Thank you very much.